Welcome. Today we are not just looking about Feng Shui and not just about meditation. We are talking about the missing link between them. Many people think of Feng Shui as a furniture placement, lucky directions, or something decorative. And many people think of spiritual practice as something purely internal, as if sitting still, breathing quietly, and closing your eyes were enough. But in Daoist thought, these two have never really been separate. We live within heaven and earth, and our bodies, our breaths, our emotions, and our awareness are constantly responding to the world we live in. That is why practice is never only an inward matter. It is not just about calming the mind or turning within. It is also about learning to come back into alignment with the larger rhythms of life. And this is why Feng Shui matters. Not because it adds something mystical to life, but because it works with the qi between a person and their environment. And that qi has everything to do with how we feel, how we live, how we practice, and whether meditation can truly settle into stillness. So in this video, I want to look more closely at what this connection really means. We will begin with the Daoist idea of living in accord with what is naturally so. From there, we will look at how the world around us shapes the world within us, and why Feng Shui belongs to that larger picture. Once that becomes clear, Feng Shui begins to look very different. It is no longer a side topic or a decorative extra. It becomes part of a much deeper question. How do we live, practice, and settle ourselves within a world whose rhythms are always affecting us? And that is the path I want to follow with you today. Not away from life, but more deeply into its order. Not toward something artificial, but back toward what is original, living, and real. So let us begin at the root. What does Daoism really mean when it says, "The Tao follows what is naturally so"? We often hear the phrase, "The Tao follows what is naturally so." But here, what is naturally so does not simply mean forests, rivers, or the natural world as scenery. In Daoist thought, it points more deeply to things being as they are, unfolding of themselves, without force or artificial interference. So, when Daoism says that the Tao follows what is naturally so, it does not mean that the Tao imitates some outward landscape. It means that the movement of the Tao is never driven by force, and never imposed from outside. It unfolds according to the original order already present within all things. The Tao is not a command laid upon the world. It is the underlying principle by which heaven, earth, and the 10,000 things are able to move and exist as they do. Laozi expresses this in a well-known line. Human beings follow earth. Earth follows heaven. Heaven follows the Tao. The Tao follows what is naturally so. This is not describing a rigid cosmic hierarchy. It is pointing instead to a relationship of layered attunement, each level returning to what is most original and most true to its own nature. That is why the Daoist path has never been about conquering nature. True practice is not the attempt to force the world into human will. It is the letting go of excess interference, so that we may return to the order that was already there from the beginning. As the mind grows quieter, we begin to see that things do not exist in isolation. They move within a shared rhythm, responding to one another and sustaining one another. And the human being, too, has never stood outside that order. This is why, in Daoist thought, the human being is never an isolated individual. We are not observers floating outside the universe, nor are we temporary visitors passing through this world. Human life has always existed within the rhythms of heaven and earth, and has never truly been separate from them. If we were to use a simple image, a human being is like a wave in the sea. A wave may appear to have its own shape, its own movement, even its own direction, but it has never left the ocean. It is not something that exists apart from the sea. It is one expression of the sea itself. This is also how Daoism understands human life. What takes place outwardly in heaven and earth also takes place inwardly within the human being. Day and night, heat and cold, climate, land, mountains, and water all have their corresponding echoes in our breath, our emotions, our organs, and the movement of qi and blood within the body. The human being is not a subject standing against heaven and earth, but a living part of their unfolding order. That is why the state of the outer world directly affects the state of the inner world. The spaces we live in, the air we breathe, the light we receive, and the stability or disturbance of our surroundings are not irrelevant background conditions. They are always participating in the way our body and mind function. This is not an imagined connection. It is simply a reflection of the fact that the human life has always been in relationship with heaven and earth. From this point of view, what we call meditation or practice is not a matter of cutting ourselves off from the outer world and retreating into some sealed inner space. It is more like a remembering that we have always lived within heaven and earth, and have always belonged to a larger order than ourselves. Practice is not becoming something entirely new. It is a gradual return to a connection that was already there. And if the human being is already part of heaven and earth, then to understand the human body, we must also understand the universe. And to understand the universe, we must eventually return to the human body itself. That is why we must now turn to the relationship between the Great Taiji and the Small Taiji. If the human being has never truly been separate from heaven and earth, then the next question arises naturally. How does this connection actually take place? The Daoist answer is this. The universe itself is a Great Taiji, and the human being is a Small Taiji within it. Taiji is one of the central ideas Daoism uses to describe the way the universe moves and comes into being. It is not a static symbol, but a living order of continual movement and a continual emergence. Yin and Yang are not two fixed opposites facing each other from a distance. They depend on one another, transform into one another, and together give rise to the endless changes, growth, and the cycles of life. From this point of view, the whole universe is a Great Taiji. The alternation of sun and moon, the turning of the seasons, the waxing and waning of heat and cold, the rise and fall of mountains and terrain, all of these are visible expressions of yin and yang in motion. The universe is not just a collection of unrelated objects. It is a patterned whole, ordered, rhythmic, and always in movement. And what about the human being? In Daoist thought, the human body is not something separate from that greater whole. It is a Small Taiji. In other words, the way the universe moves is also echoed within the human being. At another scale, the transformations of yin and yang that unfold throughout heaven and earth also appear within the body, the breath, the emotions, and the life of the spirit. That is why the Small Taiji is not merely a poetic image. It is a way of understanding the human being. It reminds us that the body is not a closed machine, but a living system that is continually interacting and resonating with the world around it. When the rhythms of the outer world are stable, clear, and full of life, the inner world more easily tends toward harmony. When the outer world is chaotic, obstructed, or unbalanced, the inner world is often affected as well. This is what Daoism means by the resonance between the Great Taiji and the Small Taiji. Our health, our emotions, and our state of mind are not only private, internal matters. They are also deeply connected to the quality of the world, the environment, and the spaces in which we live. When the Small Taiji comes into accord with the Great Taiji, body and mind enter a kind of harmony that feels almost effortless. But when the two fall out of alignment, imbalance and depletion begin to appear. For this reason, Daoist practitioners throughout history have used meditation, Daoyin, and tuna to keep adjusting their inner rhythms. The purpose of these practices is not merely relaxation. It is to bring the Small Taiji back into alignment with the Great Taiji, so that the individual may return to the deeper rhythm of heaven and earth. From here, we can also begin to understand why Feng Shui is so important in Daoist practice. If the outer environment is itself part of the Great Taiji, then adjusting space and adjusting qi are not secondary concerns. They are ways of adjusting the conditions in which the Small Taiji lives. When the qi of the outer world becomes smoother, steadier, and more harmonious, the inner world also finds it easier to settle. And once we turn our attention more closely to the human being itself, we discover that this living system we call the Small Taiji has its own most fundamental inner resources. That brings us to the next topic: the three treasures of Daoist thought: Jing, Qi, and Shen. If the human body is a Small Taiji, then what allows this Small Taiji to function, to respond, to heal, and to become aware are its three most fundamental inner resources. In Daoist thought, these are called Jing, Qi, and Shen, also known as the three treasures of the human being. These three ideas are central to Daoist practice. Most forms of cultivation, nourishment, and training revolve around them. Whether one is sitting in meditation, practicing breathwork, doing guiding exercises, or engaging in deeper internal work, everything ultimately returns to the same question: how do we preserve Jing, regulate Qi, and calm Shen? But one thing should be made clear from the beginning: Jing, Qi, and Shen are not three separate mystical substances. They are three ways of describing one life at different levels. Daoism uses these terms to speak about life as it moves from the more material to the more subtle, from form to awareness. Jing is closest to the root of life. It is more tangible, more condensed, and more deeply stored. It is the basis of physical form, growth, recovery, and reproductive capacity. In simple terms, Jing is something like the original capital of life, the strength we inherit at birth, together with the reserves that can be gradually replenished through later nourishment. Daoist thought often distinguishes between pre-heaven Jing and post-heaven Jing. Pre-heaven Jing comes from one's parents and forms the original root of life. Post-heaven Jing is replenished through food, drink, and later care, and helps make up for what is continually being used in daily life. So Jing is not a vague abstraction. It has to do with vitality, resilience, stamina, development, and aging. This is why Daoism places such emphasis on protecting Jing. This does not only refer to restraint in a narrow sense. More broadly, it means not allowing the deepest resources of life to be drained away through excess, overwork, chronic exhaustion, anxiety, and a life without measure. When Jing is depleted for too long, Qi and Shen become difficult to stabilize as well. If Jing is the foundation, then Qi is the power that sets life into motion. Qi is subtler than Jing, more fluid, and closer to what we ordinarily call vitality, energy, movement, circulation, and function. It drives breathing, blood flow, metabolism, warmth, protection, and the coordinated activity of the whole body. In both Daoist thought and Chinese medicine, Qi is not seen as something fixed and motionless. It is a living process of movement and transformation. When Qi flows smoothly, the whole system tends toward coherence. When Qi becomes stagnant, the body and mind begin to feel blocked, heavy, agitated, weak, or gradually pulled into imbalance. For this reason, many Daoist practices, breath training, guiding exercises, circulating practices, standing postures, and Taiji are all concerned with Qi. They are not about producing some mysterious force. They are ways of helping a person bring scattered, obstructed, or depleted vitality back into a state that is smoother, more gathered, and more ordered. Of the three treasures, Shen is the most subtle. It refers not only to one's mental state, but also to consciousness, mental state, but also to consciousness, attention, awareness, thought, feeling, and the degree to which a person is truly clear, steady, and inwardly centered. When Daoism speaks of Shen, it is not merely talking about an abstract soul. It is speaking of the governing center through which a living person can perceive, understand, focus, and hold the whole being together. When Shen is settled, a person becomes clearer, calmer, and brighter. When Shen is scattered, Qi is easily disturbed, and Jing is more easily consumed. This is why Daoist practice places such importance on nourishing Shen. Meditation, quiet sitting, and reducing mental agitation are not ways of escaping the world. They are ways of preventing awareness from continually leaking outward. As Shen returns to the center, Qi is more easily gathered, and Jing is more easily preserved. Jing, Qi, and Shen are not three separate things but three levels of one life. The most important thing to understand about the three treasures is that they should not be treated as three unrelated entities. More accurately, Jing, Qi, and Shen are three levels through which one life can be understood. Jing as foundation, Qi as movement, and Shen as awareness and governance. Daoist teaching often says, when Jing is full, Qi is abundant. When Qi is abundant, Shen becomes radiant. In other words, when a person's foundation is stable, vitality becomes stronger. And when vitality is strong, clarity of spirit and awareness become easier to sustain. Conversely, if Jing is continually depleted, Qi becomes weak. And when Qi becomes weak, Shen also begins to disperse. This is also why Daoism does not treat practice as merely a mental or spiritual matter. True practice is not simply about understanding something in the mind. It is the ordering and refinement of the whole living system. The body must have root, Qi must be able to move, and Shen must be able to settle. Each affects the others, and each supports the others. The sequence of Daoist practice, from Jing to Qi, and from Qi to Shen. If we were to describe the basic sequence of Daoist cultivation in the simplest possible way, it would be this. First, preserve and nourish Jing. Then allow that foundation to become stronger and more fluid as qi. Then allow qi to support the settling, concentration, and elevation of Shen. Traditionally, this is described as refining Jing into qi, refining qi into Shen, and refining Shen back into emptiness. But if we want to say it in a less esoteric way, we could simply put it like this. The sequence of Daoist practice is to first protect the foundation, then regulate the energy of life, and finally settle awareness. Now that we have spoken about Jing, Qi, and Shen, the next question naturally arises. If Jing is the most fundamental basis of life, then aside from the portion we receive from our parents at birth, how is it nourished afterward? The Daoist answer does not begin with a complicated method. It begins with a simple principle. Human beings follow Earth. To say that human beings follow Earth does not mean that we control the land. It means that we learn from the way Earth supports and nourishes life. Just as the Earth carries and feeds the 10,000 things, human life must also be cared for in harmony with those same rhythms. Different soils give rise to different crops. Different seasons bring forth different kinds of food. The order by which life is nourished has already been arranged within heaven and earth. From this point of view, nourishing life is not a matter of resisting nature, but of learning once again to receive the nourishment of the earth. Just as a mother knows that a child needs different food at different times, the earth also brings forth different crops in different seasons to nourish life as it unfolds. Spring has what belongs to spring. Summer has what belongs to summer. Autumn has what belongs to autumn. Winter has what belongs to winter. The 10,000 things each follow their proper season, and the human being is no exception. This brings us back to Jing. In Daoist thought, pre-heaven Jing comes from one's parents and forms the original root of life. Post-heaven Jing, by contrast, must be replenished through later care, and one of its most important sources is food and daily nourishment. In other words, although the body receives its original constitution at birth, whether that foundation can be protected, deepened, and stabilized depends to a great extent on how one lives afterward. If a person lives in constant violation of the seasons, eats without restraint, and keeps an unbalanced way of life, even a strong constitution will gradually be worn down. But if one lives in accord with the seasons, eats with moderation, and maintains an ordered daily rhythm, then post-heaven Jing can slowly be enriched and become a steadier support for life. This is why Daoist thought places such importance on eating in harmony with the seasons. This is not only because seasonal food is fresher, it is because food that is seasonal, local, and naturally grown embodies the life force of that particular time and place. What we take in is not merely nutrition, but nourishment that is already aligned with the rhythms of heaven and earth. To grow the right crops in the right soil and to eat what belongs to the season in its proper time. This is not only an agricultural principle, but also a principle of nourishing life. Human beings were never separate from the earth, and the body has always depended on what the earth brings forth. When we eat in accord with the seasons, we allow our own small taiji to come back into alignment with the rhythm of the earth. For this reason, what Daoism means by nourishing life is not simply the avoidance of illness, nor merely the pursuit of longevity. At a deeper level, it means allowing human life to return to an order that is once again in harmony with heaven and earth. When eating begins to follow the seasons, the body is more able to receive what it really needs. And when Jing is steadily replenished, Qi and Shen also have a firmer foundation on which to rest. So, the essence of nourishing life is not adding something magical to the body. It is reducing violation, reducing unnecessary loss, and allowing the nourishment already provided by the earth to enter life at the right time, in the right way. If the previous section was about how to replenish Jing, then next question is how to gather Qi. In Daoist thought, a strong foundation in the body is not enough by itself. Life also requires Qi that can move, circulate, and gather. If Jing is the foundation, then Qi is the force that allows life to become fully alive. And once we begin talking about gathering Qi, we naturally have to talk about Feng Shui. When many people hear the words Feng Shui, they think of furniture arrangement, lucky directions, or methods for attracting good fortune and avoiding misfortune. But from a deeper point of view, Feng Shui is concerned with the Qi present in nature and in the spaces where people live. It asks how Qi moves, how it gathers, how it disperses, what kinds of landforms allow it to settle, what kinds of structures disturb it, and how these other conditions affect the state of the human body and mind. This matters because Daoism has never regarded human Qi as something isolated. As we have already seen, the universe is the Great Taiji, and the human being is the Small Taiji. If the human being is already part of heaven and earth, then the Qi within the human body and the Qi of heaven and earth have always been in relationship with one another. When the Qi of the outer world is clear, stable, and able to gather, the Qi within the person more easily becomes calm and concentrated. But when the environment is chaotic, dispersing, or obstructed, the human Qi also tends to become unsettled, scattered, and unable to sink deeply. For this reason, Feng Shui is not some secondary body of knowledge added onto Daoist practice. It is part of the conditions of practice itself. Because human Qi and the Qi of heaven and earth are already connected, a harmonious environment that gathers Qi helps the inner Qi settle more easily. An environment that is disordered and draining makes the inner Qi restless and unstable. This is also why true Daoist practitioners have so often been skilled in Feng Shui. They understand that the practice cannot rely on willpower alone. It must also learn how to borrow the power of heaven and earth. Whether one builds a temple, dwells in a simple hut, or lives in a mountain cave, the outward form is not the main point. What matters is whether that place can shelter the wind, gather the Qi, and help the body and mind settle into stillness more naturally. From the point of view of practice, Feng Shui is not only about living more comfortably or making life run more smoothly. At its deepest level, it is about helping a person gather Qi. When the arrangement of the outer world supports the gathering of Qi, the breath, the mind, and awareness itself more easily begins to return to unity. So Daoist practice cannot be separated from Feng Shui. Not because Feng Shui adds some mystical atmosphere to practice, but because practice has never been something that happens only inside the human body. It also takes place within the relationship between the human being and the environment. True practice is not only a matter of adjusting the inner world. It is also a matter of learning how to work with the outer world. Not only gathering Qi through one's own effort, but allowing heaven and earth to help gather it as well. And once we begin to ask what most strongly shapes qi in the outer world, we naturally arrive at the next step: mountains and water. If the previous section was about why a practitioner must know how to gather qi through the outer environment, then the next question naturally follows. In the natural world, what kind of mountains and water truly carry living qi? In Daoist thought, mountains and water are not merely scenery. They are two of the most important carriers of qi in the natural world. Mountains can shelter and gather qi. Water can define, guide, and gather qi. This is why practitioners have always valued mountains and water, not simply because they are beautiful, but because they directly affect whether the life force of a place can remain, gather, and be received by those who live or practice there. But not every mountain carries qi, and not every body of water can gather it. What matters is not simply the presence of mountains and water, but the form they take. Whether they are alive, whether they have feeling, and whether they have the capacity to let qi remain rather than disperse. This is precisely what Feng Shui seeks to observe. Let us begin with the mountains. In Feng Shui, a mountain is the framework of qi and one of the main supports for sheltering wind and gathering life force. A mountain that truly carries living qi is not stiff, barren, or harshly exposed. It has movement, rise and fall, protection, and a certain vitality of form. From a distance, its ridges should feel winding, alive, and powerful, like a living dragon moving across the land, rather than straight, rigid, and without variation. Up close, its form should feel rounded, grounded, and full of life, with healthy vegetation and moist, nourished earth, rather than broken rock, jagged surfaces, and a lifeless ground. When a mountain has both an overall force and a visible living quality, it is no longer just a mass of earth and stone. It becomes a mountain that can carry qi. And then there's the water. If mountains give qi a place to rest, water reveals how qi moves, gathers, and disperses. In Feng Shui, there is even a saying: before looking at the mountain, first look at the water. This is because water often shows more directly what the qi of a place is doing. Water that truly carries qi is not water that rushes straight in and spills violently away. It is water that bends with grace, feels clear and alive, and moves slowly enough to gather. It should approach from a distance in a winding way, form a gesture of holding or embracing before the person or the sight, and then continue onward gently. The water should be clear, its sound harmonious, and its movement unhurried, so that qi has a chance to remain rather than being swept away at once. So when Daoism looks at mountains, it is not merely looking at height or size, but at whether a mountain carries living qi. And when it looks at water, it is not merely looking at quantity, but at whether the water has feeling and the ability to gather qi. A mountain with qi gives a sense of steadiness and protection. Water with qi gives a sense of movement, clarity, and life without restlessness. When mountains can shelter wind and water can gather qi, the field of a place begins to take shape. This is why Daoist practitioners have long valued places where mountains encircle, water embraces. The open space before the sight is clear. The incoming force is strong, and the outgoing water is held in check. These are not merely beautiful landscapes. They are the conditions under which living qi can remain. For a practitioner, such a place is not only comfortable to dwell in, It also makes it easier for the breath to settle, for the mind to grow quiet, and for inner chi to gather gradually. In other words, they are not looking at scenery for its own sake. They are discerning whether a place is truly fit for receiving, nourishing, and gathering chi. From this point of view, the meaning of mountains and water goes far beyond abstract symbolism. On one level, they do carry symbolic roles within the language of yin and yang. But more importantly, they are the most direct doorway through which a practitioner observes qi in the natural world. And only when this becomes clear can we understand that, in Feng Shui, mountains and water are never decorative elements. They are the two most tangible and perceptible expressions of the qi of heaven and earth. By this point, we can probably see this more clearly. Feng Shui matters in Daoist practice not because it adds some mystical quality to the path, but because it addresses a far more fundamental question: how a human being returns to an order that is once again in harmony with heaven and earth. From the idea that the Tao follows what is naturally so, to the understanding that human life was never separate from heaven and earth, and then to the resonance between the Great Taiji and the Small Taiji, we begin to see a larger picture. The human being has never been an isolated creature standing outside the universe, but a living part of the order through which heaven and earth unfold. That is why the outer environment is not merely the background of practice, but a part of the conditions of practice itself. The rhythms of nature are not only changes in the outer world, they are also moving through our bodies, our breath, our emotions, and our inner life. So Daoist practice has never been only inward. It also includes an outward dimension. Inwardly, it means understanding Jing, Qi, and Shen, learning how to preserve the foundation, regulate the life force, and settle awareness. Outwardly, it means learning how to follow the seasons, how to make use of the environment, and how to recognize places in the natural world where living qi is present. The former is the ordering of the small taiji within. The latter is the understanding of the great taiji in which we already live. They are not two separate things, but two aspects of one and the same path. And this is why we can say, nourishing life is not merely taking care of the body, but replenishing Jing. Feng Shui is not merely arranging space, but gathering qi. And mountains and water are not merely landscape, but the most tangible expressions of the qi of heaven and earth. When a person begins to see the world in this way, it becomes clear that the practice is not an escape from life, nor a retreat into some purely inward state. True practice is learning, little by little, how to cooperate with heaven and earth in the midst of daily life, eating what is right for the season, living in a place that supports the gathering of qi, allowing the body to waste less, the breath to settle more deeply, and the mind to become gradually still. As friction in life is reduced, Jing can be preserved, qi can gather, and Shen can become truly clear. So the missing link between Feng Shui and meditation is not some secret technique. It is a simple understanding, one that modern people often forget. Inner practice can never be separated from the outer world, and the order of the outer world is always shaping the inner one. And when we remember this, we also remember one of the central insights of Daoism. Practice is not about resisting nature, but returning to it. Not about forcing life to become something else, but allowing life to return to the order that was always its own. And maybe that is where real practice begins.